Which was Odavari? What's up, everybody? It is time for the Will Building stream. It's Sunday night, it's 6 p.m. PST, and nobody has anything else to do right now. Now, I find this always happens where I will, just assume that the world just runs the same every week. I forget about holidays, events, things like that. It kind of comes to being, neither secular nor interested in, sports. But if you are a loser like me and you're not into football and you want to come hang out, now is the time. Tonight we're doing monster design, which is always extra fun. We'll be talking about a number of random monsters for my upcoming 5th edition campaign that someday I will run when the world resumes. I think I say this every week. But yeah, we're going to talk about monsters. I love monsters. As anyone who follows my content will know, I like making them. I like thinking about them. I like what they tell you about the world you're designing your campaign for. And normally I would put up the big list of monsters, and I would have y'all pick which one we're going to start with. But I actually wanted to pick the first one this week, and we're going to start right up here at the top. We're going to talk about aboleths. I think aboleths have a really interesting place in Dune. and we're going to talk about it, we're going to develop it, and we're going to talk about the specific aboleth that lives in Khûm. But first, I'm going to get some water, because I left my water bottle over there, and I forgot about it. So I'm going to go grab that, and then I will be right back. Nobody panic, I'm back. What's up, David? How you doing, man? You are such a loyal viewer. I always appreciate it when you come hang out with me. Yeah, I like monsters. Monsters are my favorites, too. Great, so let's talk about aboleths. Aboleths are one of my absolute favorite monsters in D&D, but I don't exactly have their place hammered down in the way that I maybe should, so we're going to talk about them first. So, a little bit of background into the way on Dune, my current campaign setting works, is that basically I don't really deal with the planes. I have different realities that are similar to planes, but they are much more isolated and they are not as easily traversed as they are, and they don't usually map to the traditional plane. So I have no Feywild, for example. I have no Elemental Plane of Fire. I have no Mount Celestia, no Avernus, none of that. Well, yeah, please. You are welcome to plunder anything that you hear on any of these streams. But what I do have is basically my realities, my different planes, are each ruled over by some great elder. Evil is the term that is used to describe them, but whether they're actually evil is up for debate. On Dune was once ruled over by Yogg, but until the gods came and basically imprisoned Yogg inside the earth, rather than they weren't able to defeat it, they were just able to imprison it. So the idea here is that the gods are not native to on Dune, to our plane. That on Dune is something that they created to imprison Yogg. So my thinking about the gods is that they're basically like a cosmic adventuring party. These are 6 powerful entities that run around the cosmos and kick the shit out of whatever they find as they explore, right? And steal whatever is valuable or take whatever power they can, and then they move on, and they never look back. So the notion is that they're kind of this like rock band of these powerful entities that have no responsibility for their actions. My thought then with the aboleths is that because they're aberrations, I want them to come from somewhere away from On Dune. That's kind of my go-to, is that most aberrations in On Dune are from somewhere else, and the aboleth is kind of the example of that. So look at the lore as they're presented in 5th edition, which I'm going to grab, actually. And they talk about them being like predecessors to the gods, and they were here before the gods. And that doesn't super work with my setting, because Yogg kind of predates all. So you could have the aboleths be devoted to Yogg, but that seems a little... Yogg already has so much influence. I really like aberrations being separate from it. So my thought here is that aboleths are basically refugees from a reality that our adventuring gods destroyed. How they got to this plane, I don't know. But they dwell sort of in deep water. They're kind of like in hiding, and they're worried that if the gods discover their presence, they will eradicate what few aboleths remain. So they are probably evil. They are all about kind of like slavery and domination and taking over other creatures. But I liked the notion that they are basically an evil in On Dune that is not allied with Yogg. They don't really get along with Yogg because Yogg seeks to destroy the world that they now call their home, right? The aboleths want to like reform On Dune into a new home world for them. They don't really want Yogg to succeed at their plan. So they are definitely evil, and they don't... they're going to be a problem, presumably, for our characters, but you might find common purpose with an aboleth if they are trying to thwart the plans of Yogg, as the aboleth in Khûm is trying to do. So that's about all I have. I like the idea of the aboleths being more directly connected to the Kawatoa, so we might get into those today too. You can kind of see I have some notes here. Summary: a refugee from a destroyed reality, the aboleth of Khûm dwells deep in the Ezkon and plots to foil the machinations of Clan Ironspring. So the Ezcon is an underground sea. There's one huge underground sea in the eastern portion of Khûm. And I like the idea that there is one aboleth that dwells there and is kind of the overlord of that particular part of Khûm, especially during the Sorrows when there were no dwarves around. There were dwarves that lived in the area back in the day, but they aren't really there anymore. Obviously, they've been driven out. And Clan Ironspring is not something we've talked about very much here, but that's one of the big kind of reveals, one of the big secrets of the campaign, is that Clan Ironspring, one of the 7 elder clans, they were originally kind of the most progressive, open-minded, forward-thinking clan. But during the Sorrows, they were conquered and captured by Yogg, and their clan was basically destroyed, and the current Clan Ironspring that is coming back to Khûm and is claiming to take over and to inherit that legacy are actually Duergar, who are basically Duergar in disguise. They are servants of Yogg, and they are attempting to split open Khûm and free Yogg from this part of the world. Everything about their politics, everything that they're saying is all a lie. It's all a front for this very insidious, overtly evil machination. So they're definitely one of the big villain groups of the campaign, but the party doesn't know this. It's kind of like a big reveal when they sort of first uncover one of the Duergar, and it kind of becomes a like who is and who isn't, how far does this go, right? How many dwarves are actually Duergar in disguise. So I like the idea of there being an aboleth in kind of, and the Duergar clan Ironspring are sort of nearby to the sea. They kind of border it. So I like the idea of there being an aboleth in the campaign who is like an unquestioned evil. It is definitely evil. It has evil machinations. It wants to cover all the world in a new abolithic empire. But because Clan Ironspring is basically a tool for Yogg, you could maybe ally with this aboleth, right? You might find common purpose in trying to stop Yogg's machinations. So let's talk a little bit about their culture. Aboleths are intensely solitary, and the cool name, because I haven't thought of a cool name for this aboleth, is no exception. They are opposed to both the gods and Yogg. Let me get that down. Here, I'm going to move this. Actually, yeah, let me put the book over there, or let's put the book over here. Sorry, I'm still getting my setup figured out here. So they are opposed to both gods and Yogg. The aboleth breeds Khûm in the darkened depths of the Ezcon. And I think this is an important point that, like, I don't think that I think there are lots of aboleths, quote unquote, lots of aboleths in Khûm, on Dune, in the world. But I think Khûm only has the one. I think that they are, again, intensely solitary. They don't really, the only thing they hate more than the gods are other aboleths, right? Which I think can be kind of this interesting idea that they're very separated. They've each kind of like spread to the different corners. Maybe even in their reality, there were only ever like 1,000 of them at a time, right? And they would rule these great empires of their servitors, but they wouldn't really have any contact with each other if possible. And schemes about the downfall of Clan Ironspring. So I like the idea that, aboleths, that's kind of about this specific aboleth. I like the idea that they operate entirely through puppets and thralls, transforming their minions into Khûm. So I think in previous editions of D&D, aboleths they have like this disease effect, which they still have in 5th, but they could turn humanoids into creatures called scum, which are like SKUM, which are sort of like half fish, half David asks, I doubt it matters at all, but is there a reason or source for their original reality being destroyed? Yeah, I mentioned it a little earlier, but the idea is that the adventuring heroes, like the adventuring gods, are the ones that destroyed it. Like, they showed up and they said, oh, they basically treated the Aboleth's reality like a dungeon, right? They came in and said, oh, look at all these monsters, let's kill them and get rid of this place and destroy it. And so they ended up causing some kind of a, in the way adventurers do, some kind of a horrible cataclysm that destroyed the reality, and these Aboleths had to flee over to undo. No, it's a good question. It's something to think about. But the idea, right, is this kind of this colonial narrative of, like, that's who these gods are these kind of, like, rampaging, consequence-free adventurers. These, like, cosmic murder hobos, right, is the idea. And so while the Aboleths are evil, and maybe, they deserve to have their empire broken, you can argue, is destroying sight unseen this entire reality actually a good thing, right? The gods are meant to be very morally ambiguous in this setting. They're just kind of like great neutralities. They think of themselves as being heroes, but their thought process and their scale and their morality is so beyond what humans could possibly comprehend, right? Yeah, exactly, David, right? They're kind of like weird, the Aboleths are kind of like weird cosmic cockroaches, right? Like, you could definitely say that it's good that their empire was broken, but what about all their slaves, right, who inevitably died when they destroyed that reality? So Hadar, right, is another one of these entities that the gods haven't yet been able to take on. It eats gods, right, is sort of its thing. Yogg was unable to be destroyed, so they imprisoned it, and I like the idea that there are other realities beyond that the gods are, off adventuring right now, and every once in a while they'll come back to a reality that they've already conquered and check up on it, right? And they think they have Yogg contained for the moment, but sooner or later it's going to break out. So Aboleths have this sickness, this disease that allows them to transform their minions into creatures called scum, which are kind of like weird fish people that have to stay in the water and blah, 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 blah. I don't really want to have both scum and Coatua in my setting, so I think I'm going to push them together and say that Aboleths create Coatua. I never know how to pronounce it. I would say Coatua, but that's probably not right. Coatoa. Yeah. But that Koa isn't right either, so Coatua. Right? So the Coatua, I like the idea too that maybe originally the Coatua were native to the Aboleth's reality, and that they have since learned how to transform humans and humanoids into the kind of minions that used to serve them, right? These, like, water-breathing fish people. I think that's kind of neat. They once ruled grand empires of slaves. Not a big fan of the word slaves. I like thralls. And because I think it's less about, like, chattel slavery in the sense of, like, keeping humans as objects, and more about transforming humans into slaves, right? Or into these thralls, into Coatua, who then, like, willingly serve. Kutua? Yeah. I think the point is that there's no good way to pronounce it, right? Like, nobody knows. Yeah, so I like the notion that it's not about enslaving humans, it's about infecting humans, and which turns them into fish people, which then come and willingly serve the Aboleth. So yeah, are they enslaving people? Arguably, yes. But then you don't get as much of that, like, chained prisoners doing hard labor stuff, right? Like, it's more about infection and more about kind of pod people and stuff like that, right? That attended their every wish. And they desire nothing more than to convert this world into that. To convert this world into the one they fled. Cool, I like that. Let's maybe separate this out. I'm trying to think of, like, what's a cool name for this Aboleth? Like, do they have kind of Lovecraftian Azathoth style names? Is kind of what I'm leaning towards. I do my Krakens really differently as well, but they are much more like, I don't know if you've ever read China Mieville's Perdido Street Station, but there are spider creatures in that called Weavers that end up with these, like, weird fixations on mortal objects. It could be scissors or dice or whatever. That's kind of how I do my Krakens, where they are fixated on a particular thing, usually, that they become obsessed with, and then they seek that thing, whether it's to collect it or to perform it or to do whatever.
But that feels like a Kraken thing. So they end up being called things like the Watcher or the Gambler or the Shipbuilder or Shipmaker or whatever. So I think that's not the case with the Aboleths. I think the Aboleths have more of an ego than that. They're a little bit more almost intelligent. They're scheming. They're plotting. So yeah, I think they have some kind of a cool Lovecraftian, a name similar to Sothoth or Azathoth or Nyarlathotep. Those kinds of like very long embroidered cosmic horror names. So I'll have to think about that one. Those can be really tough to come up with one that's very like satisfying and cool to say. But I think that's cool for Aboleths. Like they once ruled these great empires and they used to be very powerful and now they're kind of like in hiding, Ooh, yeah, that's cool. Having it be nameless is also creepy. It's just the Aboleth. And they all go around thinking that they're the Aboleth. Yeah, that's interesting. It could be. Like, there's something interesting about that. And the Aboleth is no exception. I'll think about it. It's a cool idea. So in ancient history, the Aboleth of Khûm hid in dark waters. Been so long that it's forgotten. There's actually something cool about them as they're presented in the MM, where they talk about how they have perfect memory, that they can't forget, right? Which I don't know how I feel about that. I think that's cool, but I'm trying to decide, like, are my Aboleths like that? I think if they have been like slighted by the gods, it's kind of cooler if they, if they have perfect clarity. They've never forgotten it, right? It's never been warped by age. They know exactly what happened. Again, it makes it feel very alien. So in ancient history, before the Sorrows, I kind of wonder if there was no Aboleth in the Ezcon, because it kind of begs the question, like, what was it doing for all that time? Maybe the Aboleths are a somewhat more recent thing. Like, they haven't actually been here in Ondune that long, or at least this one hasn't been in Khûm. I kind of think it's more interesting if, like, it came into the Ezcon like during the Sorrows, right? During the period of the year when the dwarves were gone. I kind of think that's more interesting. There were no Aboleths in Khûm during the height of its power. Or I say, like, during classical Khûm. There were no Aboleths in classical Khûm. And then I think in the Seven Sorrows, one Aboleth called cool name slunk into the Ezcon through undersea caves, began to establish I wonder if it's like, yeah, this was just a little bit before the Sorrows, because I like the idea that when there was all this chaos, several of the dwarven houses that kind of border the lake disappeared, and the notion that they would be kind of the fodder for the Aboleth's first Kawatoa seems cool. A foothold in the depths. So then I think its recent history is that the Aboleth has learned about Clan Iron Spring's secret, and plots in darkness a way to thwart their sinister designs. Cool. So what are 3 adventure hooks the characters could... Because I think the Aboleth is so secretive and hidden, it's not really gonna like come out and attack them. It's very much a puppet master, right? So it feels like the hooks here are both Aboleth hooks and also Kawatoa hooks. I think one hook could be like a Kawatoa messenger appears to the characters. Cool name, yeah. Cool name. Appears to the characters offering a parlay. With the Aboleth. Okay. I hate it when it does that. Let's just do offers a parlay. Cool, Naeem. Offers a parlay. It could make some kind of like direct move against Clan Iron Spring, potentially. You know? It visits, the Aboleth visits the character, it visits one character in their dreams, showing it. Because like maybe the point is to alert the other dwarves of Clan Iron Spring's kind of treachery, right? They could be receiving these strange visions and not knowing where they're coming from, right? That feels very Aboleth. Showing it visions of Clan Iron Spring's treachery. Shows in dreams, the Aboleth shows one character visions of Clan Iron Spring's treachery. And oh, come on, Iron Spring's secret. There we go. I have a weird compulsive need to keep them one line, right? If I can. Let's see. What's a good third hook for the Aboleth? I'd like something like a little bit more combat or more like immediately dangerous to the party. Like I definitely think the Aboleth could be reasoned with, but I feel like you have to have some element of it that's, you know, more obviously monstrous. Because like it's so like stuck in the place that it is, right? It's in this body of water, and if it can't leave it, there's only so many things you can do with the Aboleth, right? Beyond having it send someone or have it like have a vision. Yeah, I mean it could attack Iron Spring very openly, right? Like, yeah, I like that. I like Clan Iron Spring is under attack. It's under attack from Khûm, and they ask for aid. They ask for aid. So the threat that the Aboleth poses is definitely domination. Like, it's not that it, like, again, it could kill you in combat, but what it wants to do is take you over. More than killing or consuming the character. Killing or conquering. I guess conquering is kind of there. Rather than simply killing the characters. Hey, what's up, 2Army Kid? Ooh, yeah, it needs to capture strong replacements. I kind of think that they can't, Khûm. I kind of think it's more interesting if they have to. The Aboleth is the only thing that can produce them, right? Like, but then I guess, yeah, if it has to capture them, then they can't really reproduce very quickly. I'm not sure. That's a great question. Maybe we'll talk about Khûm later tonight. Good question, 2Army Kid. More than simply killing the characters. An Aboleth is dangerous, or seeks to dominate and control their actions, steering them like puppets, whether they realize it or not. Seeks to steer them like puppets. I always do this, where I like write it and then I like rephrase it, and then I'm like, actually, if I just use the rephrase, that's better. Steer the characters like puppets, whether they realize it or not. Because I like the idea that, like, yes, you could definitely be turned into a Khûm, but you could also be like manipulated into doing something that the Aboleth wants you to do, right? Without even necessarily needing to consume you or, you know, mutate you into a Khûm. Whether they realize it or not. It's like an ultimate puppet master. Whether they realize it or not. Okay, cool. That's the Aboleth, I think. Still needs a cool name. That's not cool, Naeem. Yeah, cool. I dig it. Okay, let's go back to the list. I want y'all to pick the next monster. Coatua definitely makes sense, but maybe let's take a break from the aboleth and the kind of like aberrant horror and then come back. As you can see, I have many monsters in this document. I have 26 pages of monsters. So let's go down to our big list. So we just did the aboleth. I can take that one off. But we have the Axebeak, the Azure, the Black Pudding, the Blood Crow, the Cave Fisher, the Chagrin, which I actually don't know what that is, a Cloaker, a Droghazar, a Dryad, an Ettercap, a Frostworm, a Gas Spore, a Geonid, a Gorgon, a Griffin, a Nell Beetle, a Coatua, a Mephit, a Lycanthrope, an Ogre, an Oni, an Owlbear, a Paraton, a Remoraz, a Quaggoth, a Sprite, a Treant, a Twigblight, a Will-O-Wisp, a Winterwolf, a Yakfolk, and a Yeti/Tear. Are there any of those, all of those options that jump out to you the most? I have some work done on a handful of these. So I know the basic premise of the Blood Crow. I know the basic premise of the Droghazar. I know the basic premise of the Dryad and the Ettercap. The Griffin I know okay. Coatua we could talk about. Lycanthropes I know. Ogres I know. Owlbears. Yeah. Talked a little bit about the Treant in Khûm. There's a lot of options. Anything jumping out to y'all, or should I pick one? What do y'all think? Lots of choices here. Lots and lots of choices. Will-O-the-Wisp? Ooh, cool. Let's do Will-O-the-Wisp, and then we'll do Lycanthrope. Awesome. So Will-O-the-Wisp are a Fae creature, and as David points out, my Fae are a little bit different from other Fae and other settings. The way mine work, it is a little bit different, is that they are basically stories made real, right? There's enough magic. Hey, what's up, Shadowner? Thanks for coming. I appreciate y'all coming and hanging out with me instead of watching the bull, the superb owl. So let me write this up really quick. Let me just copy it, maybe another one. So I've done a little bit of work on the Will-O-Wisp. So let's clear these out, and then we will talk about them. So I have like the basic premise. I pulled up. I think I wrote some random encounters for Will-O-Wisps. So I might open that up and look at those, because I think I did kind of like some mental work, but I never actually wrote it out what I think their thing is. But Fae on Dune are really interesting, and I'm excited to talk about it. I always like to design them because they are grounded in the world kind of a lot more than some other monsters are. But there are a couple of other monsters in Khûm that have similar kind of move sets, or like they fill similar niches. So I would be curious to find like what can we do with the Will-O-Wisp to make it unique. So the way that Fae work in On Dune, for those of you who aren't familiar, is that they're basically like stories made real. That there's enough inherent magic in the world that if a story is repeated enough, right, then it will eventually kind of come true, right? So I'm trying to think of a good example. So satyrs in Khûm, or not in Khûm, in On Dune, in the world itself, are basically born from people telling stories about lonely shepherds, right? They talk about like, oh, that guy, you know, he went up on the hillock for 3 weeks and didn't come back down, right? Like, doesn't he get lonely up there? I bet he fucks the sheep. And so they talk about, you know, somewhere out there in the hills, there are his half man, half sheep offspring that are running around, right? And that story gets told enough and by enough people and in enough contexts that, yes, it eventually makes them real, right? The inherent magic of the world creates this thing, and that's a Fae, right? So they don't have an ecology in the traditional sense, because they basically only exist to fulfill the purpose that they are, the purpose they have in the stories, right? So sprites are another good example. A sprite on Dune is basically like an elven guardian angel that elven parents would tell their children, like, okay, don't get into any trouble, or the sprites will see you, right? They'll know, and they'll come and they'll tell me. They'll keep you safe. They'll protect you, right? And so, again, this story, this idea was told enough times that it eventually manifested into these, like, tiny, like, somewhat, I think they're invisible, these tiny flying protective spirits that follow elven children around, right? So the Will-o'-the-Wisp then is not an undead in my setting. It is a fey creature. Although maybe it is an undead. I think it's an undead in the book. But let me see what I have written down under my random encounters, because that will tell us maybe a little bit more. So I'm kind of opening that document right now. So I have 3 hooks here. These are random encounters. So strange lights, will-o'-wisps twinkle in the distance, luring the characters away. I mean, the classic move, right? Strange lights. Will-o'-wisps hover around the corpse of a frostbitten explorer, dead in the snow. And without realizing it, the characters have followed will-o'-the-wisps far off course and must make wisdom saves to see how far they've strayed. Are kind of my 3 random encounter hooks for the will-o'-wisp. And we can maybe change those because they're kind of dependent on those are random encounters rather than like actual whole adventures that would be based around will-o'-wisps. I think in the book they're actually undead. They're like spirits. Let me check. I think they're undead. Yeah, tiny undead. But I don't know. Because they never really discuss, like, where they come from. Bound by dark fate or dark magic to feed on fear and despair. So I think I might make mine Fae, because that's more interesting, right? Summary here is bobbing lights in the darkness. Yeah, the helpful Fae. Interesting. Tulpa. Bobbing lights in the darkness. Will-o'-wisps. Oh, come on. There you go. Is it will-o'-wisp? I don't know how you spell that word. I just had it open. Or is it will-o'-wisps? Will-o'-wisps are fae spirits born from stories of lost travelers. So yeah, it feels like, what's the story here, right? It feels like it's about straying out at night, you know, that like you might get lost or you might be led astray. You know, it feels like it would be, again, tales like this are always, you know, warnings or folk tales or kind of gossip that goes too far. So I like the idea of, especially in like a cold climate, you know, you can't trust every light that you see when you get lost, right? That you, if you wander too far into the woods or onto the ice flows, you know, you might think that way is home, but don't trust to lights. Make sure you know your way back on your own, because those lights can sometimes lead you astray. It might be a will-o'-wisp, right, trying to lure you off. Because I kind of like the idea of them being fae, but they're mischievous fae, or they're dangerous fae, right? That they are mechanically the same as they're presented, that they want to, like, drink you of your hope. But they're technically fae and not undead, right? The last breath of someone who wandered away. That's cool. I like that. I dig it. Of lost travelers. Don't follow the lights. They warn. Because they might wish to tempt you. They might lead you astray. I dig that, Army Kid. So, the story goes that will-o'-wisps are... Oh, huh. I did not know that, Shadowner. That's cool. A tulpa? I've never heard of it before. I'm gonna look it up. Will-o'-wisps, yeah, are the lost breaths of travelers that wandered away. So are they vengeful? Because like I think of their last breath, and that almost kind of makes them seem like they're undead. you know? Like, what is the goal of a will-o-wisp? In the book, it's like to drink, it's like fear, right? They try to drink hope and despair from the people that they lead away, which is kind of cool, but doesn't really fit with the story. I kind of like the idea of them. I guess hope sort of makes sense, right? Like, it's trying to lead you, hey, come this way, right? And so it tries to drink your hope. Let me look at that mechanically. They're lonely. That's kind of cool. Or they're lost, right? Like, because they never made it back. Yeah, I like the idea of them being lost. Like the will-o-wisps are wandering too. They don't know where they're going either. It's kind of interesting. Let me see. What do they do mechanically? They consume life. A will-o-wisp can target one creature it can see that has 0 hit points and is still alive. Must succeed on a DC 10 saving throw or die. If the target dies, it regains hit points. Okay. So it can shock you with lightning damage. It's invisible. It can turn itself on and off. It can move through... It's incorporeal, so it can move through solid objects. Yeah, and it basically drinks your life force. So it seems like the idea here is that will-o-wisps are the souls of evil beings that perish in anguish or misery as they wandered forsaken lands permeated with powerful magic. So specific. They thrive in swampy bogs and bone-strewn battlefields where the oppressive weight of sorrow stoops even heavier than the low-hanging mist and fog. Trapped in these desolate places of lost hope and memory, they lure other creatures towards dismal fates and feed on their misery. Let's see. In the miserable domains they haunt, they sometimes form symbiotic relationships with their wicked neighbors. Hags, Oni, black dragons, and evil cultists work with will-o-wisps to draw creatures into ambush. As their evil allies surround and slaughter creatures, the wisps hover above them, drinking the agony of a last breath and savoring the sensation as the light of life goes out in a creature's eyes. So they're kind of all about that last moment of death. I like Army Kid's idea, though, that if we're going to say that they're fae instead of undead, that they are lonely, right? That they are... Or that they're lost? Like, how do they lure someone out towards them, right? Because if they're the spirits of people who are lost, they were trying to lead the victim to where they die, but have forgotten the location themselves, so they just look for company on their... Oh. Yeah, it's like, help. Help me, right? Like... Yeah, I love that. The idea is that they died in the wilderness, right? And then they are trying to lead people back. So maybe they are undead, actually. It's so interesting because, like, there's like a weird confluence here. So, like, the way that the tulpa in our case works, tulpa, is that if enough people told a fake story about will-o-wisps, they would become real. In that story, they could be undead creatures, right? Like, if I told enough stories about a ghost that lived in my attic, and that story got around and everyone in the village told it and it was widely believed, then a ghost has a chance of appearing in my attic. It wouldn't be an actual ghost, it would be a fey creature, right? But it would act in the way that I kind of expected a ghost to act, because it is bound by the limits of the story to some extent, right? So that's what's so crazy about this, is that, like, this is a case where it's a fey creature that the stories say is an undead creature. Does that make sense? So it's like this weird, like, double-layered thing. I like that, though. The will-o-wisps are the lost souls of people who are the last breath of people who died lost and alone in the wilderness. Often found in cold places. But I can see them being in deserts too, right? Like places where like exposure could kill you, right? So yeah, swamps make sense, right? You could drown. Like forests, maybe not as much, but I like the idea that they're kind of found in like extreme cold and hot places. Like the idea of like at night in the desert, right? Like will-o-wisps leading you is cool because they're so associated with swamps, it kind of is fun to flip it on its head a little bit. Often found in cold places like Khûm. Will-o-wisps will lead creatures to where they died and feed, tricking them into believing they are headed towards civilization. Because I like that idea of, like, you know, at night seeing these glowing lights and thinking, oh, that's a distant town, right? Like, I'm almost there, especially like on the tundra. You know, you're seeing lanterns far away, or maybe it's a distant camp or something like that, right? That it's a lot about don't follow the lights because they might not be trustworthy, right? Headed towards civilization. So I like the notion of them, like, leading them towards where they died, right? They're bound to the location of where someone went missing. Ooh, yeah, the souls of missing people is interesting, right? Civilization. They are reputedly the souls of missing people. Lost and lonely. So the trick here, though, is that if we say all of that, right? Caverns and... Ooh, that's cool, Vaughn. Will-o-wisps in the Underdark? Oh, I like that a lot. Yeah, you could totally find them underground. I love that. So the difference here, though, is that the undead will-o-wisp, as it's presented in the book, you know, wants to feed on, like, the last life essence of these people that they lead away. Our will-o-wisps, if they are fey creatures and they are kind of like the lost souls, or they're posing as, right, like the lost souls of ooh, yeah, hallucinations and mirages. That's cool. There's, like, an interesting connection there. Yeah, maybe we give them, like, mirage powers. Because one thing I can do a lot is I can redesign stuff, too, right? We don't necessarily have to just do them as they're done. Will-o-wisps, in particular, feel like they have, like, a wide swath in mythology, right? They've been interpreted different ways, so I think we're very much within our rights to kind of mess around with what they can do. I like them as, like, scavengers. Feels cool that they would, like, hover over battles and, like, try to drain life. But that, again, feels very undead. So, like, what is the threat that a will-o'-the-wisp poses, right? Like, theoretically, they're all about luring characters, right? That it's about, like, enchantment. But that's not like, it's about becoming lost, right? It's not about really endangering yourself. It could be exposure, right? Like the thing that killed the original person, you know, could be an element to it as well. But in terms of, like, as a PC, you know, if you were to throw will-o'-wisps at the party, then, like, what is the danger? What can they do? Basically, I'm thinking about their consume life power, and is that still what they want, right? Like, do they try to... Because I could see them, like, even imposing exhaustion or something like that, right? Like, they could kill you by wearing you out. I'm gonna put the design thing, because I like the notion of them having mirage powers. That's kind of cool. Like, I like that there's a connection between them. Yeah, they could pose different encounters. That's true. That's a good point, Shadowrunner. Mirage. Will-o'-wisps have illusory powers and can show illusory powers. And can show... Oh, yeah, what if it's like, dude, that's it, Army Kid. Yep, it's like if they try to leave. Right? Like, if they realize, like, wait, this is wrong, we're going the other way, it's lonely. You know, so it lashes out at them. It's like, no, you stay with me. And maybe it tries to use the mirages to, like, trap them, or it can use its lightning. Yeah, it's about loneliness. That's it. Boom. I love it. So its threat is misdirection. Misdirection. Here, let me write this. have illusory powers and can create elaborate mirages to lure characters away. Creatures away. Deeper into the wilderness. I like it too that like they don't have charm, right? They can't bewitch you, but they can make you think you're supposed to go this way, right? And they just like keep making it seems like you're never getting any closer to your destination, right? It feels like what's going on. I thought there was, you know what I mean, like but it's all at a distance. Like I think up close a mirage is very obviously a mirage, right? But it's only at a distance, right? They're very good at making that. I think that it always has to have like a light involved in some way, or the will-o-wisp like goes in between. I love that. That's great. Nice job, Army Kid. So the will-o-wisp is lonely and seeks company. Yeah, hallucinatory terrain. That's totally it. Hallucinatory terrain is a good spell for that. Cool. I dig it. Yeah, they can still have their lightning thing. I don't know that they would have consume life, but I do like the idea that they get hostile if you try to leave. That's perfect. Seeks company. Leading characters into the wilderness. Deeper into the wilderness where it's bound, right? Where it is bound. It only becomes hostile. Only becomes hostile when they attempt to leave. Yeah, cool. I love that. That's so cool. We have like our own version of the will-o-wisp. Let's talk a little bit about their history, but I think that let's see. So I want to look at these hooks again as well. I think we can change this middle one here. So ancient history. Oops, crap. That's open a file. That's not what I want. Get out of here. I think that like will-o-wisps. This is the trick with Fae, right? Is that they don't really have history because they don't really have like society. But we can make this little point. We're a predominantly underground, predominantly subterranean phenomena. Predominantly subterranean phenomena. Phenomena. Until humans came to Khûm. I mean, unless you flip it. I mean, I think they could definitely be underground. But I like the idea of the dwarves being especially suspicious of moving over the skyway, they call it, right? Who told tales of missing pioneers and trappers. When Khûm depopulated, stories of will-o-wisps fell out of favor, dried up, and thus so did will-o-wisps. And then present day, as more and more people return to Khûm. This is kind of the history of all Fae in Khûm, but will-o-wisps are returning in numbers, are returning to lure strangers away, to lure the unwary into the wild places. Cool. So I'm going to change this middle one, because they're not really associated with death anymore. A mirage lures the characters. Or let's see. While traveling their destination. Their destination never seems to grow closer. I guess that's kind of that last one. Yeah. When they attempt to leave its territory, A will-o-wisp. Where do you put the apostrophe? Becomes hostile and attacks. Because I can see them like wandering into a will-o-wisp's territory, and it's like excited and bobbing around them, and then once they get past the point where it can't follow them, then it gets hostile and tries to trap them and stuff like that, right? Yeah, that's awesome. Cool, will-o-wisp, we did it. Nice. Okay, let's take it off the list. So we were gonna do lycanthrope next. So lycanthropes are kind of interesting because they are a little bit different. We already took it off. So lycanthrope. They are a little bit different than some of our other monsters, in that they are intelligent. So let's pull those up. That's gonna be L lycanthrope. So history lesson. Orcs in Undune are one of the three great people from the First Age, one of the three great empires. They are not your sort of Tolkien-esque orcs where they're kind of hobbled, cockney, exarchs of evil. They are a people like dwarves and elves. They are very connected to nature, but, they have a culture all their own. And there were orcs that lived in Khûm. They were invited a long time ago by a dwarven monarch who needed extra muscle in a civil war they were fighting, and they've been here ever since. When the Sorrows happened, the orcs kind of split into two groups. One group went underground. One group were kind of more herders, went underground, and eventually, over the many generations, became creatures called Grimlocks. And they herd giant insects. They're kind of like subterranean shepherds, but for huge beetles, using like ankhegs as their sheepdogs. The other half fell back into that's a good point, Shadow. That's exactly what we're going to talk about. The other half fell back into an old orcish way called lycanthropy. So the notion with lycanthropy and Undune is that it was never a curse, not originally. It was basically like a sacred orcish rite. The orcs worship animals as their primary deities, and so to be closer with nature, to be more like an animal, it was basically like a sacred weapon that was used in war. They're kind of like a Viking berserker, right? You would like freak out and turn into a bear and savage your enemies. But it was always sacred. It was like a divine thing. Only when humans kind of came into contact with it, and their biology didn't work the same way, and they kind of, were infected with the disease, did it become sort of something to be feared. Orcs tended to be able to control it, and it's kind of a thing that was passed down through their bloodlines. Not all orcs are lycanthropes, but it can be passed in a ritual rather than just like being passed by a bite or an infection. So some of the orcs that lived in Khûm basically sought, when the Sorrows happened and the winters got unbearably cold and the dwarves fled, some of the orcs sought refuge basically in animal form. They turned themselves into bears or wolves or mammoths or whatever it is, right? Yeah, not just druid temporary shifts. They lived almost permanently as lycanthropes. I think it's like less priests and more kind of like holy warriors, like paladins is maybe a better way to think of it, right? Where like there were definitely priests that would have helped like onset it, but I think that the people that they would have gotten, it would have been the best warriors. But I guess maybe it doesn't really matter because you turn into a wolf. I'm not sure. So now in Khûm, there are still lycanthropes, but they basically spend all of their time living as animals. They don't really interact in humanoid society anymore, right? So you'll get situations where you'll have like a pack of wolves, right, that is led by one particularly large, particularly intelligent wolf, and then it's revealed, if you fight them or kind of cross them, it's revealed that the wolf that leads them is actually an orc who lives as a wolf, right? Or, there's a particularly ornery goat on this pass, and if you end up killing it, then they revert back to their orcish form. So it's almost like dire animals in a certain sense, right? In Khûm, every once in a while you will encounter one of these, whether it's a cave lion or a bear. It's the hybrid form. That's a warrior specialty. Yeah, that's cool. So originally an orcish ritual. Lycanthropy was always sacred. Was always a sacred transformation to the people of Auros, which is the continent they come from. In Khûm, some orcs retreated, or during the Sorrows, some orcs retreated into a bestial life to survive the winter. Cool. Those orcs, I gotta come up with like a name for them, because the Grimlocks are one thing. I wonder what the like orcish word for lycanthropy would be. I could see it involving thrope. So orcish, the group of orcish languages all kind of come from one root, and they generally do a thing where they smash consonants together. Most words in orcish have 3 consonants that are like all crushed together. So Grimlocks, for example, in orcish is actually Gurmlock, which is 4 consonants, Grmlok, Gurmlock, right? Things like that. So there'd be some word, because lycanthrope has the THR, I wonder if thur is in there somewhere, right? So they'll need some name, right? Because they're kind of the 2 different groups that still live in Khûm. We'll call them Lycans for now, but I'm sure that will change. The Lycans responded to the Sorrows by transforming into animals and living by living as animals. By permanently living as animals? Yeah, permanently living as their patron animals. Whether bears or wolves. Whether bears or wolves or deer. I guess they tend to be, or boars, I guess, or boars. They tend to be predators, but not always. It's interesting. While they initially attempted to retain much of orcish culture, I like that idea too. They didn't think like, okay, let's just live as animals. They were like, we're safer as animals because, you know, we can go out into the snow, we can do whatever, we can go hunting. Karstamore is cool. But you gotta get oh yeah, you do have 3. Karstamore. Interesting. I like that as an orcish name. I might write that down. Karstamore. But I like the idea that they didn't start as thinking like, okay, we're just gonna live as animals. They were like, well, it's safer to go, if we're gonna go hunting, to go as wolves. So they would go off as wolves and they would do that, and eventually their success would attract other wolves, and they slowly started to spend more and more time in beast form, and eventually just kind of atomize, right? Like maybe one clan or tribe of orcs would have a bunch of different lycanthropes, and you'd have some bears and some boars and some wolves, and then over time, over the years, they would kind of slowly start to separate. So one of the other things that make orcs, you have an orcish English dictionary, very cool. One of the other things that makes orcs very different from other races in Ondune is that they have kind of the opposite thing that elves and dwarves have. So elves obviously can live to be very long, and Ondune they can live to be about 1,000. Dwarves can live longer than that, depending, but they tend to cap out around the 500 to 250, somewhere in there. Orcs are very unusual in that they have extremely short lives. They live for 10 years. An orc is an adult at like less than a year. They're kind of like, well, they're still children, but like at a year they've reached adulthood, but under that they can be up and running and hunting and productive. They live these incredibly short lives. And I really like that in contrast to the really long-lived elves and dwarves, right? So many races in fantasy live forever. I kind of wanted to experiment with the idea of a race that lived really quickly. And so everything is very, in orcish society, everything is very hurried and rushed. You know, they don't spend a lot of time worrying about decisions. Like, they're very impulsive. They tend to be very impulsive. They tend to like make decisions right in the moment. You know, they have no time to waste. So what's interesting about that is that means you would get over 500 years of this happening, right? Over the of the land being abandoned, there would have been so many generations of orcs, right? That like so much time passes that they have the current lycanthropes that live there have no, like, maybe in their distant past they remember that there used to be dwarves and humans here, but that was so long ago, right? I think they're relatively few, but it says that's like ancient history. Yeah, it would be super changeable, right? Because they're very adaptable. They're very like flexible. They don't have these like rigid social ways that like dwarves have, where dwarves have kind of been the same for hundreds of years, right? Or thousands of years without a lot of change. Orcs are very fluid. They're very adaptable, right? And you can kind of get them. They're very good at living in other cultures and other societies. So while they initially attempted to retain much of orcish culture, the more time they spent as animals, the more animalistic they became. Tribes fractured. Became tribes fractured, drifted apart, became more like packs. Now the lichens of Ondune, while intelligent, share little culture with one another. And I like the idea too that they were like originally very like pastoral. They a lot of herding, a lot of kind of almost steppe culture, right? Where they're herding and they get all of their products from animals. They have a thing where, at least original, like traditionalist orcs, basically didn't believe in mining or using wood. That they believed that the earth was something that was like pristine and couldn't be touched and trees weren't to be cut down, or wasn't to be mined. They survived entirely on animal products because they believed the animals as being oh, that's interesting. Would bears be different in Khûm? Bears are very solitary. Could that be influenced by the tribal orcs still staying together? Yeah, it could be. I like that. Yeah, you maybe get these like big groups of bears. But again, it's been a very long time, so I'm sure you still have kind of like, and there's also the distinction between like an actual bear and an orcish bear, right? I like the notion that the lycanthropes have a tendency to like call sort of animals to them, right? It's not like a power they have, but if you're like a really successful wolf, other wolves might come towards you, kind of like flock towards you, and you would get they would lead these like really big packs, right? There are also wargs that are running around, which we talked about in a previous stream, but the idea with the wargs is that they were basically the symbiotic species to the orcs. Orcs and wargs have a close relationship, whereas wargs, rather than being evil, they're just basically intelligent wolves. So yeah, there's definitely crossover between the lichens and the wargs. That's for sure a thing. Yeah, cool. But I like what you're hinting at there, Army Kid, is the notion of one of the ways you can tell that maybe there's a lichen in this group of animals is that they're acting in a little bit too intelligent way, right? Like the notion of, I was kind of hinting this before, that they would herd, right, back when they were orcs. So the notion that, well, maybe they still herd, right? Like a pack of wolves that herds caribou, or keeps them in pens or does something like that, right? Where it's like they're a little bit too intelligent, and it's probably because they are some portion of them are lycanthropes just living as wolves, is the idea. Cool. Often a non-animalistic behavior, such as unusual sociality. I don't know if that's a word. or herding behaviors, herding techniques observed among animals is a strong indicator that a lichen might be present. Okay, so lycanthropes existed in classical Khûm, but were rarer. Only indulged during wartime between the tribes. One group of orcs, the lichens, chose to live their lives as beasts to survive the harsh climate of the Sorrows. Countless generations of orcs have risen and fallen since the Sorrows. Those that remain have little memory of dwarves ever living here. And that would generally be true during classic Khûm as well, but because the dwarves are always around, they kind of always had to deal with them, like having 500 years go by, which is so crazy too that, like, to a dwarf, there are some admittedly very old dwarves currently alive that remember Khûm, right? There's like at least one NPC in the main campaign that was like around in Khûm and is still around now, and like he's crazy ancient. Shadowrunner played in a one-shot that had a similar character. So the dwarves, you know, have very good memories. Either they or maybe their parents, or at worst case their grandparents, remember Khûm. For orcs, like think about even for humans, think about how long that would be, right? Like 500 years is God. It's twice and then some the length of America, right? Think about how long that would be, how impossibly long that is. And it's in that fantasy world where, like, you know, technology doesn't really advance in the way that it maybe should if we had the same resources or if we had magic, right? But how long would that seem to these? Or that would be like ancient Egypt to us, right? Like just a goofy length of time that has passed. So they have no recollection or no way to prepare for these dwarves or humans coming back and trying to live on their territory. So the wargs have a very similar thing. We talk about that, right? They have kind of a very like militaristic attitude towards these humans and humanoids coming back. I think the lycanthropes are a little bit more reclusive. Like they're just kind of like going back into the wild places and hoping to be ignored. I mean, like, dwarves, at the time of the campaign, dwarves have been coming back to Khûm for about 50 years already. So they've already been 5 generations of orcs, you know. I love that. Okay, so hooks. Upon defeating a fearsome beast, the characters discover it was actually a lichen. You know, pretty classic. That's an obvious one. It's another good hook. I think their threat is combat. Absolutely fearsome in battle. A lycanthrope proves a deadly enemy and has little reason to treat with adventurers. Treat kindly with adventurers. The characters cross through territory protected by a lycanthrope. Another good hook. Something that's like a little bit more role play, right? Like, A village tells of an extremely large wolf that is stalking the edges of the village. Characters find out that it wants to trade with the village. That's interesting. Yeah. Ooh, what about like a bounty? A bounty is placed on the head of a massive beast upon tracking it down. I think it's a similar thing, right? Like the village tells them of this large wolf that's stalking the edge of the village. Upon tracking them down, they discover a lichen, not a... Ooh, yeah, that's always good. Discover a lichen, not a monster. Let's change this one to the characters stumble across a wounded orc, right? If nursed back to health, they transform into a gigantic bear and go their separate ways. Yeah, I like that. Cool. Awesome. And they're people, so they have a whole other thing. I like the idea that they are, if the wargs are very much about like fighting the humans and taking it to them, the lycanthropes just kind of want to be left alone. Right? They don't really they don't have the same kind of organization that like a wolf pack would have. Lycanthropes just kind of want to go up into the hills, you know, and not mess with these humans. There are few enough of them, and they are not organized in the way that wargs are. Okay, great. That's the lycanthrope. It's 7:15, so we have about 45 minutes. We can maybe get 2 more in if we're quick. Any thoughts on this list? I'm trying to think if there's any other suggestions. Will-o'-the-wisp and lycanthropes. What do you guys think? We've got the axebeak, the azure, the black pudding, the blood crow, the cave fisher, the chagrin, the cloaker, the drogazar, the dryad, the ettercap, the frostworm, the gas spore, the geonid, the gorgon, the griffin, the knell beetle, the coatua, the mephit, the ogre, the oni, the owlbear, the paraton, the remoraz, the quaggoth, the sprite, the treant, the twigblight, the winterwolf, the yakfolk, and the yeti. And the tear, which we'll talk about. Anything? I'm kind of leaning towards coatua, because we sort of talked about them earlier. One of these days, I'm going to have to figure out the cloaker, because like I find cloakers to be really baffling. I don't really understand the idea of the monster, and I never have. But I kind of have that like Keith Baker Eberron rule about like if it exists in D&D, then I want to talk about it. Ooh, treant. Yeah. I have an idea for the treant, actually, so that's maybe a good one, because we could probably get through it quicker. Feel free to suggest other ideas, guys, because we can always do that after the treant. But let's do the treant. All right. So, the treant... I don't know if you guys can see that. Here we go. This is kind of like the aboleth in that there is one of them in Khûm. There's a treant in Khûm. But it is not a very nice treant. We will talk about what that means. So there are a lot of trees and forests in Khûm. Fewer now, due to the sorrows being pretty devastating to the local flora. But there's one in particular. It is a forest in the far northern, the northwestern corner of Khûm, called the Shatterwood. Yeah, let's do the Kautuau Kudu. Yeah, let's do the Kautuau afterwards. Awesome. So, it's called the Shatterwood. It wasn't always called that. It was called something else before, and I don't know, but it's called the Shatterwood now. And basically, it sort of went through an apocalypse. There used to be wood elves that lived there. And while the dwarves fled, there was basically a landslide that prevented the elves from fleeing in the same way. And they kind of like the orcs, they fractured into 2 groups. And the elves sort of went a little bit mad over the course of the sorrows. So, long story short, my elves work a little bit differently, but they have a cultural idea that's tied to the seasons. And so it was the friend wood. Everything was great in the friend wood. But they're tied to the seasons. So elves experience the seasons much more physically and viscerally than other races do. Kind of think of it as like the big, like, magical version of seasonal affective disorder, right? So, like, in the springtime, it's a time of sort of, like, love and flirtation and new meetings and things like that. In the summer is a time of sort of, like, romance and sex and kind of passions. The autumn is a time for child rearing, right, and responsibility. And then the winter is a time for kind of like severing connection and self-reflection and stuff like that. So elves live in these perpetual cycles, and it very much affects their like psychology, kind of what the trees are doing at any given time. So you can imagine then, you're exactly right, Shadowrunner, but the sorrows shattered the peace. You can imagine then what would happen to a population of elves that was perpetually stuck in winter. When the sorrows fell upon Khûm, the elves that lived there were basically unable to psychologically get over the winter, right? Like during the winter, they don't mate, they don't procreate, right? So they don't have any children, and they kind of got lost in this spiral. All the trees slowly started to die, right? Because it was just perpetual winter. And there are some evergreen trees, but even those evergreen trees couldn't live in those harsh climates, and they slowly start to die. So the forest is withering and kind of turning to these dead, naked trees. Some of the elves decided to try to leave Khûm and left and sort of wandered off, but some of them remained. I think they're called the Kilariel, those that stay, and they basically turn to this kind of cult of wildfire, right? They begin to believe the only way to bring the trees back is to burn them. And so they start burning the forest, and they're led by this druid, this wildfire druid, right? They're kind of these somewhat deranged Mad Max apocalypse elves a little bit, right? They're called the snow elves. And when the dwarves come back, they kind of have to like grapple with like what happened to the elves that used to live here. So the notion is that there's a treant that still lives in the Shatterwood, and it's basically a tree blight. That there was a treant that was like the guardian, the original guardian of the Shatterwood, and it maybe at some point was connected to the elven community. It was like their guardian. But this cult of wildfire eventually kind of overtook the elves, and they burned it, right? They believed it to be, weak or unable to help them or whatever, kind of in a pitch of fanaticism. They burned the tree. And I think almost in a sort of Gulthias tree way, it survived, but it was sort of like horribly burned and tortured, right? And so I think it's functionally a tree blight, but it still kind of has the intelligence of a treant. So once the guardian of the Shatterwood, it has some cool name, we'll come up with it, Shatterwood. The treant was burnt and broken by the Kilariel elves. Now, a tree blight, it seeks to spread its... Had to fight back. Yeah, it drew in the madness from the wildfire. I love that. Yeah, that's cool. To spread its blight across Khûm. So the idea is that rather than, it's kind of like a wholesome Treebeard figure, this is kind of like a dark, twisted, again, blighted figure, that it's like sending out twig blights, kind of like acorn seeds to try to grow bramble, and like, I like the notion of it like still being able to grow trees, right, and awaken trees, but they're dead trees, right? Like it's almost like it's planting these skeletal trees in the ground, and they're growing into these like horrible twisted shapes, right? That it's this blighted, twisted, evil plant life. I like the notion too that it's evil, but it's really almost like more of a zombie, right? Like it has some intelligence, but it doesn't really understand what it's doing. It's kind of going through the motions of spreading the forest, right? Trying to bring it back to life, but it can't, right? It's been killed. It's like this undead tree, essentially. So essentially an undead tree. Treant seeks to seed Khûm with new trees, but doesn't realize that all its blights, all its seeds Its roots and seeds. Its roots and seeds are twisted, corrupted, burnt by wildfire. The trees, the blights it sends out, the blights it dispatches are twisted with malice. Are twisted, gosh, I cannot type, you guys. Are twisted with malice. Malice. And the trees that sprout from them are contorted and dead. And dead. Their branches like skeletal claws. Skeletal claws. They choke the life from the few remaining evergreen trees. Threaten to cover all Khûm in a dark, twisted wood. Right, but it's this idea of like, it's still going about its kind of like seeding activity. It believes the forest is in danger, but it doesn't realize that what it's seeding is just more death and corruption, right? Awoken by the elves, by the wood elves, Treant was once a guardian and protector, planting new trees to replenish the old. And there's something interesting too, that like the treant would kind of keep planting new trees and keep trying to spread the forest, but it would presumably be cut back by dwarves and loggers and things like that, right? But now, with no one to do that, right, like their spread is just getting worse and worse. Like the Shadowwood is like spilling over the edges, and there are these like dead forests kind of spreading across Khûm. I think that's really neat, right? Now, however, or during the Sorrows, it pleaded with the Kilariel. Pleaded with the Kilariel, begging them to abandon or to stay the course. For its heresy, it was burned, only to rise again as a tree blight, spreading corruption across Khûm. Treant means well, but is too old and burnt and damaged to understand what it's doing. So hooks. The characters stumble into a blighted wood. Dead trees that move. Trees that move. A druid character overhears the agony. Hears dreams of the agonized treant through vibrations in the ground. I like the idea of like a forest of dead trees, sprouts seemingly overnight. Like the party is going somewhere and they get to their location. When they come back, there's like a forest of dead trees that wasn't there before, right? And it's like, how could that be possible? Twig blights are their own thing, right? Which we'll do at some point. But yeah, I think it's like, it's a combat threat, I think. I mean, I guess the real threat is like about infection, right? Infection. While the treant is a mighty foe. Is a mighty foe. The true danger it poses poses is to the flora of Khûm, threatening to cover all with a blighted wood that chokes every other life, all other life. Is to the countryside, to cover Khûm with a blighted wood that chokes all other life. It's kind of like there's a line about what would happen if Treebeard turned evil, right? All other life. Cool. Yeah, so pretty simple. We need a cool name for the treant, but I think it would be an elven. Cool. That's the treant. Did we take it off the list? Let's take it off. Nice. And then let's do Coatua. Oops. See if we can get that done today. So Coatua. So I know that I want them very much tied to the aboleths, right? That the aboleths make them. That the Coatua were native to the aboleths like reality. But now, obviously, none of them managed to escape. Very few of them managed to escape. And so in order to kind of continue their aquatic empire, the aboleths have found a way to transform humanoids into Coatua. So let's talk about that and how that works. Because, again, I'm kind of replacing them for Scum, right? Which is the aboleth-like monstroid. They are just weird. That's true. I like them, though. They're one of my favorite monsters. Okay. So I'm going to pull them up because they've got, like, whips and they've got, like, all kinds of weirdness. So one thing I want to try to avoid with the Coatua and with the aboleths in general is the notion of, like, human chattel. That they would, like, keep slaves, I don't really feel like is something I want to explore in my world, but I do think, like, the notion of the aboleths still as sort of, like, overlords is important. So I think the way it works is that they infect humanoids with their sickness, and that makes the humanoids want to serve the aboleth. So there's definitely still, like, a domination body snatcher pod people thing, but it's less about, like, keeping humans in, like, cages and stuff like that. I'm just not really interested in slavery as a theme in my world. So they're mad, degenerate fish-like humanoids that once inhabited the shores and islands of the surface world. Long ago, humans and their ilk drove the Coatua underground, where they dwell in madness and everlasting night. They can no longer abide daylight. I think I like the idea that they can't abide daylight. Like there was no sun in the universe they came from, right? I like that they're kind of all about priests, because that makes sense. I think, yeah, originally they make their own gods, right? Coatua worship gods of their own insane creation, but if enough Coatua believe that a god is real, the energy of their collective subconscious is kind of like the tulpa thing, right? Can cause a god to manifest as a physical entity. What if that's what aboleths are, right? The first aboleth was a god that the Coatua kind of willed into being. That's really neat. So, originally native to a faraway reality. Coatua were wiped out by the gods. Only when the aboleths escaped to Ondune were they recreated. Escaped to Ondune. Were they recreated to serve their masters. So culture. Because that's cool, because you can kind of keep that classic Coatua thing of them, like, creating their own gods. Theocratic rulers, archpriests are surrounded by fanatical devotees of their faith. The archpriest demands the subjects worship a specific god. And it's got so affirm it manifests its powers of a high cleric. And they have, like, weird gear. Okay, I mean, I think for the most part, that's doable. So one of the questions we talked about earlier was the idea that, like, if the aboleth, like, juices essentially make Coatua, can they breed true? I think maybe, like, in their own world they could, right? Originally, but these Koatua are all made by the Aboleths, so they can't, right? Like, they have to be kind of gone through, they have to be infected with the disease and so they transformed, which it almost implies that the disease the Aboleths made is like a new innovation they've come up with since kind of fleeing their reality, right? So Koatua invented the Aboleths, willing them into being from sheer fanatical belief. When the gods destroyed their reality, they too were destroyed. When the Prime Pantheon, I should say, because that's the name, the Prime Pantheon destroyed their reality, they too were destroyed. I guess this is more ancient history, but whatever. The current Koatua are creations, pure creations of the Aboleths. Made from captive humanoid thralls. They cannot reproduce on their own, and thus... Yeah, I agree. Only the Aboleth have the power to make more. Yep. Then they can never overthrow the Aboleth, right? And thus, but I also like the idea that makes the Aboleth very cautious, right? Very cautious with its followers. Because making more is actually really difficult. Because creating more is a slow and arduous process. So they never, like, attack or appear unless they're certain sort of a victory, right? Like, they're extra cautious. In their home reality... Oops, I don't know why I got bold all of a sudden. In their home reality... Yeah, High Tenant, definitely. Their home reality, there was no sun. The Koatoa fear daylight. Okay. So ancient history, exiled or destroyed by the gods. True Koatua no longer exist. Only humanoids transformed by an Aboleth could still be considered. Because what's interesting about that is that, like, the gods destroyed that world and destroyed Koatua it's like a genocide, right? Like, are the Koatua good? Who knows? But, like, do the gods get to decide that, right? Like, that's, again, a big theme here, is these kind of, like, crusading colonialist gods that just bump around and just, like, make cavalier decisions about which universes get to live and which ones don't, right? Would still be considered Koatua. So during the Sorrows, as dwarves fled in droves. Yeah, creating their own gods would explain. Yeah, that's cool, actually. Shadowrunner, I like that. They were threatened by that idea. They could just manifest gods to challenge the true gods as they saw themselves. Yeah, I love it. As the dwarves fled in droves from Khûm, the Aboleth seized much. I think it's Clan Copperkeel, yeah. So there's one clan that lives on, like, an island in the middle of the Escon, of the underground sea, and they basically make, like, copper-bottomed boats they can, like, sail around. And so the notion is that when the Sorrows were happening, there was all this chaos. The Aboleth kind of saw that as his opportunity and attacked and basically seized all of Clan Copperkeel and turned them into its servitors, transforming them into its Koatua servitors. into its Koa-Toa servitors. But what's cool is that, like, then for the most part, we get to basically just use the Koa-Toa as they're presented here, right? Like, we're not really changing that much. They're created by the Aboleths, but that doesn't really change their stats, I wouldn't imagine. We might change some things about the Aboleth, but the Koa-Toa can kind of just be their own thing. The Aboleth plots in secret some way to use the Koa-Toa to launch an assault against Clan Iron Spring and their captive troglodytes. Okay, cool. So hooks with Koa-Toa. Again, it's tricky because they're so tied to Aboleths. What if we do one where it's like the characters encounter Koa-Toa that are separated from Aboleths, right? Maybe there's a thing where they have to like be within a certain radius of the Aboleth, or the effect, they lose the effect, right? Like Pariah, Koa-Toa, who've lost connection with the Aboleth. Obviously they get attacked by them, right? Like Koa-Toa raiders attempt to seize and infect. That's kind of interesting, right? Like seize or infect the characters that like all they really care about. Their Aboleth moves may be defeated. That's cool. Seize or infect the characters with Aboleth slime. That like their goal isn't to carry them off, it's just to get them infected, so that way they slowly begin to turn into an Aboleth, or an Aboleth into a Koa-Toa. What was the other one I was gonna do? One of the characters begins to exhibit signs, because it's almost about like transform. And I think that's the real threat, is transformation. Begin to show signs of the transformation. Like, was their water befouled or something, right? Transformation. Koa-Toa is frightening. Koa-Toa is frightening. We're blowing through this. We might get a chance to do another one. Not because of the combat threat it poses, but instead because of the fear of transforming into such a horrible creature. Transforming into such a loathsome creature. Yeah, drip from whatever, like the old classic old green slime thing, right? Such a loathsome creature. Cool. Well, okay, we have 20 minutes. We did 4 monsters. Let's see if we can squeeze one more in there really quick. The lazy party wants to be done, but I think we should do one more. Let's just do the Blood Crow. The Blood Crow, I know. Let's just get it knocked out. Blood Crow. So the Blood Crow is based on the Blood Hawk, which is a monster from the monster manual that I found to be a little bit boring and needed kind of a spruce up. So I came up with the idea of the Blood Crow. It's not a monster, but I do think it's a hazard in the 4th edition, in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Green slime. I think it's listed under like dungeon hazards, because I was just looking at this the other day, and I'm pretty sure that they're still in there. So it's not a monster, but it does exist in some form. We do have blights here. Yeah, living splinters from Name, the undead tree, and at the heart of the Shadowwood. There you go. Okay, so let's do Bloodhawk or Blood Crow. Blood Crow. So the Bloodhawk is listed as kind of a boring bird monster. It's like a hawk that's like a little bit meaner, extra mean on the hawk, right? The molds, right? Russet mold and stuff. I always like the russet mold. That's probably my favorite. Oh, I have like an affection for green slime. There's a little bit of green slime on the portcullis gate to Castle Ravenloft, and it's been there since the very beginning. And I think it's in every edition. And it's just like there's no like narrative. It's just like there's a little bit of green slime on the doorway, be careful, and it'll drop on you, and you'll take constitution damage. And that's my favorite thing about Ravenloft. The party hasn't been there yet, but I can't wait to hit them with some green slime in the Christmas Drought game that I'm running. That maybe someday I'll get to run again. But yeah, I have an affection for that particular patch of green slime, because it just feels like such a random, like, oh, it gotcha. But I think it does like constitution damage, or at least it used to. It was really nasty. So the Blood Hawk is a type of hawk that is extra bloody. Taking its name from its crimson feathers and aggressive nature, the Bloodhawk fearlessly attacks almost any animal, stabbing it with its dagger-like beak. Bloodhawks flock together in large numbers, attacking as a pack to take down prey. Refrigerator mold. Oh, I'm gonna... Excuse me. So the idea with the blood crow is that, like, hawks don't act like that, right? They don't do that. But crows can be really kind of pugnacious. So I liked the idea of sort of the carrion birds du jour of Khûm being these kind of like red-feathered sanguine crows that kind of can be they're everywhere in Khûm, and they're kind of a constant nuisance. So red-feathered crows are named for their red feathers, for their crimson feathers. So they're basically mechanically bloodhawks, but I think I like them better as crows. It gives them a little bit more intelligence and a little bit more kind of pugnacity, right? For their crimson feathers and aggressive nature. Aggressive nature. Blood crows. Blue crows. Blood crows. Fearlessly attack almost any potential prey. Gathering in great murders to overwhelm their foe, their prey. Let's do this. Let's do attack any creature. So again, very much like a Bloodhawk, but we're gonna do them as crows. Oh, come on. Ah, damn it. Great murders that overwhelm their prey. Not really a culture, but a constant nuisance. Blood Crow. A constant nuisance. Is that a band? Or Norse sticking in the brain? A constant nuisance to all the predators of Khûm. Blood crows can descend on any kill, and harass the annoyed creature for a bite of their meal. They are particularly fearless. And pugnacious, with a taste for irritating and attacking humanoids in particular. The largest blood crow swarm or murders can blot out the sun. A fearsome, like an almost biblical, threat. Because I just like them being like everywhere, and when I lived in Seattle, crows were like near constant. You know, you would drop a piece of food, and like 4 crows would descend on it. So I like that idea, especially during the Sorrows and the present day. Like these crows have kind of gone mad here, right? Like there've been no one to scare them off, no one to hunt them. Right. Ooh, I like that idea. What about like bounties? Trappers in Port Summer. Offer bounties on blood crow wings. not for any actual use, but simply to lower the population of the creatures. An eternal nuisance. I had that before. Blood crows are as old as Khûm. But gathered in much greater numbers with the arrival of humans. Humans and their fishing. Humans and orcs and other surface dwellers. While the sorrows initially drove them off, they slowly returned over the course of the exile. Nesting everywhere humans used to live. So yeah, I like the idea that they, in particular, were all over Port Summer, right? I have 3 hooks for them already. So I might just skip that for now, and we'll just say, like, overwhelm. Oh, what? Oh, I did a paste, I see. What on earth happened? That's very strange. There we go. Overwhelm. Yeah, I'll leave the hooks. Oh my gosh, stop that. Overwhelm. I want you to be bold. I want you to be regular. Yeah, exactly. That's one of the ones I have. An individual blood crow is no danger. A murder of blood crows, annoying. Are irritating. A sky red with blood crows are a menace. Are a menace to be avoided, not fought. Not fought. Okay, yeah, we flew through this. We have 5 monsters. Nice job, everybody. Cool. So let's see. We did the blood crow. We did the aboleth. We did the blood crow. We did the treant. We did the Kawatoa, and we did the will-o'-the-wisp. Did we do 6? Aboleth, blood crow, treant, lycanthrope, will-o'-the-wisp. Okay, no, we did 5. That's what I thought. Right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, thanks so much for coming, everybody. We still have about 10 minutes, but I think I'm going to call it there. My brain is tired from thinking. But that was an excellent stream. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Got a lot of important work done on all of the thousands of different monsters in Khûm. It feels like there's always more monsters to do. But we took a big chunk out of them. I'll be back next week. I think we might do random encounters of Khûm. But rather than focusing on monsters, I think we're going to do random like NPCs that you might bump into, which is going to be kind of fun. I haven't really thought of a good way to tackle that yet. But I will be back next week, and we'll figure it out. Thanks so much for coming. If you're watching this on VOD, please subscribe to the channel. That way you get notified whenever we post new content. There should be a new video of Thoughts from the Table coming out tomorrow, and I'll be streaming on Tuesday, so there's a lot of extra stuff. Oh, it is 6. Yeah, Blood Crow, Will-o'-the-Wisp, Treant, Kawatoa, Lycanthrope, Aboleth. We did 6. I've never done 6 monsters before. That's awesome. Thanks for counting that for me, Shadowrunner. Yeah, so please subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. If you like my content, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at XPWebSeries. I'm a professional dungeon master. You can hire me at prodm.net. That's pro-dm.net. All the links are below in the doobly-doo. And yeah, thanks so much for coming out. Enjoy your Superb Owl parties if you're going to them. I assume if you're here that you didn't go to a Superb Owl party, and that's good because you shouldn't because of the quarantine. But thanks again for coming out, everyone. I think we did a nice job coming up with all these monsters. I will talk to y'all next time. Thanks so much, Odvari.